You have probably pictured it before, the version of your life with more zeros in the bank account, the specific calm that would arrive if you never had to check a price tag again. Most people picture the same 3 or 4 scenes: a bigger house, a stop clock at work, a family finally unclenched about money. But in a small town in Vermont, an old man in a coat held together with a safety pin was already living something close to that life, and almost no one around him had the faintest idea. Because the richest person in that town wasn't the one who looked like it. He was the one who made absolutely certain he never did. His name was Ronald Red. For most of his life he pumped gas and swept floors, first at a filling station, later part-time at a department store after hours, wiping down the same tile every evening for years. When he died in 2014, at 92, the town discovered that the man in the patch coat had quietly accumulated close to $8 million, nearly all of it in dividend-paying stocks he had bought decades earlier and simply never sold. Every retelling of Ronald Reed's story tends to hit the same 3 beats: the frugality, the discipline, the surprise. But one detail almost always gets left out, and it happens to be the detail that matters most. It has nothing to do with what he bought, or what he refused to buy. It has to do with who was allowed to know. Ask most people why they aren't wealthy, and you'll get some version of the same 3 answers. Not enough income. Not enough education. Not enough luck. The right opportunity never showed up at the right time. It's a comforting explanation, because it locates the problem outside of you, somewhere in the economy, somewhere in the timing of your birth. There's real truth folded into that explanation. Circumstance matters. Opportunity is not evenly distributed, and no amount of psychology erases that. But the explanation quietly assumes something that turns out to be false, that if income were the missing ingredient, more income would fix it. It doesn't, reliably. Researchers who have studied professional athletes and lottery winners, people who receive enormous sums of money in a short window of time, keep finding the same uncomfortable pattern. A striking number of them end up financially worse off within a few years than they were before the windfall arrived. Picture a different kind of person entirely. A surgeon, say, in her 14th year of practice. A 6-figure salary, twice over. A house that photographs well. A calendar full of the kind of vacations people describe, unprompted, as bucket list. And yet, if you actually traced what stayed behind after every expense, every premium, every purchase made to match the life the income implied, you would often find less accumulated wealth than the man in the patch coat quietly built on tips and a gas station wage. Not because she earned poorly. Because almost everything she earned had somewhere urgent to be, and nothing about urgency like that ever announces itself as a mistake while it's happening. Which means income was never really the variable in question. Something else was doing the actual work, something with much less to do with money, and much more to do with the mind. The psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent years studying how people actually make decisions involving money, as opposed to how classical economics assumed they should. Their most influential finding, known as loss aversion, is deceptively simple. A loss hurts roughly twice as much as an equivalent gain feels good. Losing $40 produces more pain than finding $40 produces pleasure. That sounds like a footnote about money. It isn't. It's a description of how the entire nervous system is wired to protect comfort and status in the present, even at direct cost to security in the future. Picture the actual moment this trade gets made. It rarely looks like a decision at all. It looks like choosing the nicer vacation over the extra retirement contribution, or the newer car over the older one that still runs fine. In the room where that choice happens, only one side of it is emotionally available. The vacation is vivid, a beach, a version of yourself relaxed and worth photographing. The retirement account is an abstraction, a number on a screen that means nothing yet, and won't mean anything for 20 years. So the trade you're actually making, almost never consciously, isn't spend now versus save for later. It's a felt loss today, the discomfort of looking like you have less than you might, against an abstract, distant, and felt gain. Framed that way, of course most people choose the version they can feel. You already know this trade, even if you've never once named it this precisely. Wealth, it turns out, has almost nothing to do with what you earn, and almost everything to do with what you're willing to let people believe about you in the meantime. But that raises a harder question than it first appears to. Why would anyone choose the feeling of being seen as successful over the mathematical certainty of actually becoming secure? The psychologist Darrell Bem offered part of the answer decades ago with something called self-perception theory. Bem's research suggested people don't only act according to who they already believe they are, they also infer who they are by watching their own behavior, the way a stranger would. Buy something expensive enough times, and you don't just feel successful in the moment. You quietly update the self-concept underneath it. I am someone who has money. I am someone others see this way. The trouble is, a self-concept built out of purchases has to keep being paid for. It doesn't compound. It resets. The version of you constructed that way needs constant, ongoing proof, and every dollar spent proving it is a dollar that will never quietly become 8 million. Psychologists have also found that people adapt to a new baseline far faster than they expect to. Studies going back to the 1970s, comparing major lottery winners against people who had survived life-altering accidents, found something that seems to defy intuition. Within a relatively short window, both groups tended to drift back close to their prior, ordinary level of day-to-day happiness. The house that once felt miraculous becomes, within a year or two, just the house. The raise that once felt life-changing becomes the new floor, unnoticed, taken for granted, almost immediately. Which means the proof never actually finishes landing. It has to be renewed, again and again, because the mind keeps quietly resetting the bar it was meant to clear. There's an older word for this than psychology, older even than economics. In Roman theatre, actors performed behind carved masks called personae. The word literally meant that through which sound comes. Audiences never saw the actual face underneath. They saw the mask, and they responded to the mask as though it were the person. 2,000 years later, most spending behaves exactly like that mask. Not deception, exactly, something closer to necessity. A car, a watch, a home in the right neighborhood. Each one functions as a persona, a face built specifically to be seen by an audience that will only ever respond to what shows. The economist Thorstein Veblen had a colder name for the same instinct a century later: conspicuous consumption. Not spending to enjoy something, but spending as a signal, aimed outward, proof that you belong in a certain room. And the signal has to keep being sent, because it never quite lands as permanent. A new watch can feel like proof you've arrived. A bigger house can feel like proof you're safe. The right car in the driveway can feel like proof you matter. Each one works for a while. None of them work for good. It functions like a bridge built to look like it reaches somewhere, impressive from a distance, walked across again and again, arriving nowhere new each time. None of this is really about money. Money is simply the one thing this culture keeps score of in public. Picture two co-workers finishing the same difficult project. One tells the story of how hard it was before anyone even asks. The other says nothing unless asked directly, quietly certain the work will speak for itself. You can probably guess, correctly, which one is more anxious about whether it actually did. The same mechanism runs underneath careers built to impress people you don't even like, opinions defended because abandoning them would look like weakness, relationships maintained less for love than for how they read from the outside. Underneath the spending, and underneath the identity performing it, there's a third layer, and this one finally explains why the pattern is so hard to interrupt. The anthropologist Ernest Becker argued that a great deal of human behavior is quiet management of a fear too large to look at directly, the fear of disappearing without ever having mattered. Becker called our attempts to outrun that fear immortality projects, the careers, monuments, and possessions built not because they need it, but because they seem to promise we won't simply vanish. A fortune, spent visibly, is one of the more effective immortality projects available. It doesn't just buy comfort. It buys evidence, proof, right now, that you were here, that you counted, that someone noticed. A fortune saved quietly buys none of that. It buys only the thing itself, money, growing, unseen, uncelebrated, for decades. This is part of why financial advice so rarely works on its own. It arrives as a spreadsheet, aimed at a problem that was never really about spreadsheets. Telling someone to spend less doesn't touch the part of them quietly trying to prove they still matter. Which may be the real reason so few people manage it. Not a lack of income. Not even, really, a lack of discipline. A refusal, usually unconscious, always understandable, to trade the felt proof of mattering now for a future no one will applaud. So here is the uncomfortable part. If you've ever wondered why the saving never quite sticks, why a raise disappears into a slightly better version of the same life within a year of arriving, The honest answer probably isn't that you lack willpower. It might be that some part of you has been quietly voting for visibility over invisibility every time the two came into conflict, and that vote gets cast so automatically, so far below conscious thought, that it rarely feels like a choice at all. Think about what you were actually buying, the last time you bought something you couldn't fully justify. Not the object itself. What it was standing in for. Whose eyes you imagined on it. What you were hoping it would prove, and to whom. Notice, too, how rarely this shows up only around money. The instinct to mention a promotion before anyone asks. The instinct to keep a hard month invisible, because a hard month doesn't read as impressive. The instinct to let a difficult year look, from the outside, like a good one. Different currency. Same transaction. That isn't shame. Almost everyone is running some version of the same program, because almost everyone inherited the same wiring, a nervous system built for small tribes, where being seen as valuable to the group used to be the difference between protection and exile. The instinct isn't broken. It's simply operating in a world its wiring never anticipated, one where an entire fortune can be built, or lost, without a single other person ever finding out. Which brings the story back to Ronald Read, and the detail almost never mentioned when people retell it. It isn't that he lived cheaply. Plenty of people live cheaply and still stay poor. The detail is this: his own stepson did not know the size of the estate until after his death. Not because Read had anything to hide. Because he had simply stopped needing anyone to know. He had made a trade most people never consciously get the chance to make, the felt proof of mattering now, for something slower and almost entirely invisible while it was happening. No mask. No audience. Just a ledger, growing quietly, for 50 years, answerable to no one. Which leaves a stranger question underneath the one they started with. Not how much money you could make. Whether you would still want it, if no one else could ever see that you had it. If your car revealed nothing. If your address meant nothing to anyone listening. If every visible proof of having arrived were quietly switched off, and the only person who would ever know what you'd built was you, would you still be building it? And if the answer changes the moment no one's watching, what exactly has it been for, all along?